Hi everyone! I've been wanting to try a project with hardwood for a long time, but since I don't have a thickness planer or a jointer, I felt kind of limited on what I could do. A couple weeks ago, I was walking through my local Home Depot and I discovered that they carry S4S walnut, so that means wood that has been sanded and surfaced on all four sides. Basically, it looks like the regular pine boards that you can buy, but it's hardwood and it's beautiful. I had the idea to include a little bit of brass, and the next thing you know, I have an awesome cutting board. Keep watching to see how easy it was. Since walnut is a little expensive, I decided it was a good idea to use some sample boards first before making any cuts on my real material. I needed to determine what angle to cut the handle section to leave a comfortable opening. I decided to cut each board 35 degrees off of square. I cut my 3-foot long length of walnut roughly in half. Then I designated my top edge. On each board, I measured 1 inch from the side, and that's where I would start my angle. I think cutting boards look really nice with a routed edge, so I choose a chamfer bit to put a little bit of a detail on the top and outer sides of my boards before I join them together. Next, I test fit my boards next to each other to make sure that the angle would align and that the chamfers were even. I also marked out the location for my joinery. I chose to use the beadlock system from Rockler, which are basically floating tenons, but you could use any kind of joinery you would like. Dowels or biscuits would be easy, but honestly, on a small panel like this, you could probably get away with just glue on your seam. With the beadlock system, it's really important to have good glue coverage. For this project, I used Titebond 3, so I would have a little bit more working time to make sure my angle was aligned just right. While you're watching, make sure to hit that like button down below. I recently picked up some K-body clamps from Bessie. They are a little expensive, but man, they are worth it. They make gluing up panels like this so much easier. Before my glue hardened all the way, I removed all the excess squeeze out. The next morning, I removed the clamps and checked out the rough shape. I used my sliding miter saw to square off the uneven bottom end of the cutting board. Next, I started to lay out the hole for the brass handle. I measured 5/8 of an inch from the top edge and 3/8 of an inch from the top face, and made my marks on both outside edges. I don't have a drill press large enough to accommodate this size of panel, so that means I needed to drill my holes by hand. I made a really simple jig with some extra 2x4s and clamps on my workbench to hold the panel upright. I knew the handle holes needed to be very precise, so instead of going ahead and starting with a large drill bit, I started with the smallest one that would reach through the thickness. Once my pilot hole was drilled, I chose a drill bit 1/64 larger than the 3/8 diameter of my handle. That would allow for a little bit of space for adhesive. At this point, I give the whole cutting board a good sanding, working progressively up to a 320 grit. I slid the 3/8 inch brass rod into the handle holes to make sure that they would fit and that my alignment was okay. I then felt to make sure that one end of the rod was flush with the edge of the cutting board. Then I made a mark on the opposite end so I knew how much I needed to cut off. I used my cordless Dremel and an abrasive wheel to cut off the excess. To secure the brass rod in place, I used 2-part epoxy adhesive. After thoroughly mixing the epoxy, I used a small dowel to apply it to the hole furthest away from me. Then I started to insert the rod from the opposite hole. When I only had about an inch of the rod sticking out, I applied the rest of the epoxy and pushed the rod all the way in. I made sure that there was no excess epoxy left on the wood, and then I allowed the cutting board to dry overnight. And now for everyone's favorite part, applying the oil finish. I applied 3 solid coats of mineral oil, and then I allowed the cutting board to dry for 24 hours before using it. That's how easy it was. Now some of you might be thinking, technically this is not a cutting board. That's fine, call it a serving board if you want, but I'm really happy with it, and it's going to get cut on. For a full materials list and printable building plans, head to the blog. You can find the link in the description box below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.